Where did you first meet him?
I met him at my stepmother's house.
And did you meet his family?
At some point,
And did you meet his wife?
that same time, yes.
And did you learn her name?
I'm sure.
Is her name Christine Ricci?
Yes.
And do you see her in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Could you please point to her and tell me an article of clothing she's wearing, please?
Light blue sweater.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the identification of the defendant?
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
The record will reflect that the witness has identified the defendant.
And did you learn what Michael Ricci did for work when you got to know him?
I think when I first met him, I knew he worked for a friend, Mark, doing sprinkler systems.
Did you also know that he was a firefighter?
I learned that at some point.
Okay. And after you initially met Michael Ricci, did you, at your stepmother's house, did you see him again thereafter?
Yeah, a few times.
And where would you see him?
There or where she worked at the BBC.
And what is the BBC?
A restaurant and bar in Pembroke. Or it's not that anymore. I forget the name of it now.
And BBC stands for?
British Beer Company, I think.
Okay. It was, is that a bar restaurant?
Yes.
Okay. And how often would you go to the BBC?
A couple times a month.
And was there a particular day that you would go?
My friend and I would meet on like Thursdays, sometimes a Friday.
And did you have a particular friend that you would always go with, or would it vary?
Usually
Who was
the
that?
same one, Danielle.
Was your job near there or your home? Is that why you chose to go there?
It was in Pembroke, but it was in between the two of our houses, and my stepmother worked there, so
And when you say in between two of our houses, are you referring to you and your friend Danielle?
yes.
Okay. And had you been going to the BBC on Thursdays prior to 2018, or was this something new?
Here and there. It wasn't every Thursday.
And did a friendship start between you and Michael Ricci?
Yes.
And how did that happen?
Just hanging out there. He would be there sometimes with a friend, Mark, or guys he worked with.
And was Mark, is that Mark McDonald?
Yes.
And was he a friend of yours as well, or did he become one?
He became, he was good friends with my dad, and when my dad passed, and when he was sick, I got to know Mark more, and he stayed very good friends with my stepmother.
Fair to say that you knew Mark McDonald before you knew Michael Ricci?
Yes.
Okay. And were there occasions when you and Michael Ricci would stay later than friends to talk at the bar?
Yes, once in a while.
And you got to know him?
Yes.
And how often, and again, we're talking about time period of, I'll draw your attention to the summer of 2018, going into the early fall. Were you still only going to the BBC one time a week?
Oh, yeah, no more than that.
And would you say each time you would go there, you would see Michael on Thursdays?
Not every time.
And at some point, did you and Michael share with one another the state of your kind of personal affairs?
Yes.
And did that include the state of his marriage at the time?
Yes.
Did he wear a wedding band?
No.
What would Michael Ricci typically drink when you were with him?
Bud Light.
Did he ever drink anything hard alcohol?
Not that I saw.
Any shots?
No.
And how much would he typically consume when you would be with him? Was it any amount that concerned you?
No, maybe a handful.
And at some point after learning about the state of his marriage, did your friendship turn into something more?
Yes.
And when was that?
The end of August, very beginning of September.
And did it turn into a romantic relationship?
Yes.
And how long did that last?
It ended Columbus Day weekend, so maybe 6 weeks.
And how did it end?
He had texted me that, I think, Sunday morning and said, "We're over, I need to end this. I will call you later. Please don't say anything, just listen."
And did you respond?
I don't remember, I think I just said, okay,
Were you confused?
yes.
And after that initial text from Michael Ricci, did you hear again from him that weekend?
No.
Did you hear again?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
He texted, then he called later that evening.
and this was Columbus Day weekend of 2018,
Yes,
which would have been in October, correct?
yes.
And what, if anything, did he say when he called you?
Basically, we're over, you never meant anything to me. It was very like scripted, just a few,
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
It's stricken. You said it was over. You never meant anything to me.
yes.
And did you hear from him again after that?
Yeah, a couple months, maybe a month or two later, I had several missed calls one night. I don't, like in 10, 11 o'clock at night. I did not call him back. And then I think days later, there was another couple missed calls, and then another call I did answer.
Okay. And during November 2018, so shortly after things ended with Michael Ricci, who, if anyone, did you receive text messages from?
Christine.
May I approach the witness, please?
You may.
I'm just going to ask you to take a look at it's 1, 2, 3 pages, just going into the top of the 3rd page, and take a look at that, read it to yourself, and tell me if you recognize it, please.
I thought you didn't have to redact it.
Do you
Yes.
recognize that series of text messages?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that to be?
The text I received from Christine.
And is that a fair and accurate depiction of the text messages that she initiated with you on November 6, 2018?
Yes.
I'd ask that this be marked as the next exhibit, subject to redaction. If they're actually this one, I don't think that's one.
Is there any further
renewing.
objection to this one?
Renewing my objection.
I note your renewed objection as redacted. It'll be marked and admitted as Exhibit 32.
And what was the nature of her initial communication with you on this text message, ma'am?
Objection, Your Honor. It speaks for itself, doesn't it?
I'll let it go through it.
Could you repeat that?
Yes, could you tell us about this? May I approach again, Your Honor?
You may.
Well, actually,
It-
I don't need to yet. Ma'am, could you tell me what the text message, the gist of the text message was?
I'll
Objection.
see you at the side of the bench.
change the stickers. I would do it. I'm the court reporter do it, but.
May I continue?
You may.
With regard to exhibit number 32, ma'am. Just showing you that on the larger screen. Is this the initial text message that you received from Christine Ricci?
Yes,
Fair to say it's dated November 6, 2018, 10:50 a.m.?
yes,
And during the course of this conversation, that was the first time she had reached out to you either by calling or texting, correct?
yes,
And fair to say she indicates that she's contemplated going back and forth on what exactly she wanted to say to you. That's how she starts it off.
yes,
And within the body of this text message, she indicates that you both had a part to play in this, and she's referring to the affair, correct?
yes,
And then she proceeds to tell you of nothing, you have no guilt, no morals, not even a respect for your own family, correct?
yes,
And that you disrespected her, correct?
correct.
And now showing you page 2, this is fair to say a continuation of the initial text message we were just referring to. And she speaks about people that she knows in your family and having respect for those people. Is that right?
Yes,
And she also references the fact that Michael Ricci owns that he made a big mistake.
yes,
And she proceeds to tell you to stay away from her husband and her family, correct?
correct.
And that if you see her, you should walk in the other direction, correct?
Right.
And then the last page of that series of November 6, 2018 message. She ends it by saying, if you see him, you should do the same, meaning go the other direction, correct?
Yes,
And she ends it by saying, you stepped into my world, and since you don't know me, I suggest you find your way out and stay out, correct?
yes,
And how did you know who that text was from, ma'am?
just by the context.
And then at some point, did you put her name as Christine in your phone so you knew it was her?
Yes,
Okay. And was that the only text she sent you?
at that time, yes.
And did you respond to that series of text messages? Drawing your attention, ma'am, to ended November, beginning of December of 2018, what, if any, missed calls did you receive?
Those were the calls
From
in the
whom?
middle of the night, Michael's phone.
How many times did his phone number call you?
At least 7 or 8.
And this was approximately 2 months after your relationship ended with him. Would that be fair to say?
Yes,
Did you call back that number after all of those missed calls?
no,
At some point, did you finally pick up the phone after the 7 or 8 missed calls?
yes,
And who was on the other line?
Michael.
And what did he say to you?
Again, I don't love you. I didn't love you. I love my wife.
Okay. And how did he sound?
Very monotone.
Objection.
Overruled.
How did he sound?
Very monotone.
And what did you say?
I just said, okay.
And once he ended your short relationship, did you ever call or text him unprompted?
No,
Did you ever call or text the defendant unprompted?
no.
Now, drawing your attention, ma'am, to December of 2019, did you see the defendant?
Yes,
Where?
at my house.
And that's at 212 Plymouth Street in Pembroke?
Yes.
And approximately what time of day was this?
In the evening, I'd say 6, 7.
Was it dark outside?
Yes.
And could you describe what happened, ma'am?
She knocked on the door and I opened it and she said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Seriously?" And then I realized it was her. So I stepped outside. She said, "I need to talk to you." So I stepped outside on the deck.
Was anyone else home?
I don't think so.
And how did she appear, namely Christine?
At first, started yelling and screaming. And then,
Yep.
go ahead.
I'm sorry. So at first she was yelling and screaming. Was she, what was she yelling and screaming?
How could you do this to me? That was my husband. And should I continue?
Did she say other things initially as well?
She was kind of all over the place. There was yelling and screaming, there was crying, there was calmness. I had explained that I was told that their marriage was over, that they both mutually agreed to separate, that she was seeing somebody else, she wasn't wearing her rings.
I would object, Your Honor, and move to strike.
All right, which portion are you moving? I'll see you at the side of the bench. Jurors, before we go further in this testimony, I'm going to give you a limiting instruction with regard to prior bad acts. You heard this earlier. I'm going to remind you of it now. You are about to hear some evidence which concerns an encounter alleged to have occurred between the defendant and this witness before the incidents which are the subject of the charged crimes in this case. This evidence is to show the nature of the relationship between the defendant and the witness and the defendant insofar as it may bear on the issues of a possible motive and the defendant's intent in this case. Like all evidence, it's up to you to decide whether you believe it or you do not, and to decide what weight that evidence should have. This evidence is not introduced, however, to show that the defendant had a bad character or propensity for violence. You may not consider the evidence for those purposes. The defendant is not charged with committing any crimes with respect to this case other than the charges contained in the indictments in this case. You may not consider such conduct as a substitution for proof that the defendant committed the crimes charged, nor may you consider it as proof that the defendant has a criminal propensity, personality, or bad character. You may consider such evidence solely on the limited issues of the defendant's state of mind, motive, and intent with respect to the indictments in this case. You may not consider this evidence for any other purpose. Specifically, you may not use it to conclude that if the defendant committed the other acts, she was more likely to have committed the crimes charged in the indictments. You may proceed.
Thank you. Ma'am, just getting back to where we left off, when you said those things to the defendant with regard to thinking they were done and things of that nature, what was her response?
She agreed.
And what did you say?
I said, well, if you both agreed that the marriage was over and that you had moved on, he was moving on, you had a conversation, then why am I wrong to think that that we couldn't date? And she said, because he was my husband.
And what, if any, other questions did the defendant ask you as it related to your relationship with Michael Ricci?
She asked a lot about dates, where I was on certain dates. I didn't recall a lot of them. She had asked if he had bought me a birthday present. Just more so about dates and where I was and what we did.
And what, if anything, did Christine say about a recent phone call you received from Michael?
Objection, Your Honor. Same one, renewed.
Same basis.
Yes.
I overrule the objection for the reasons stated at the side of the bench.
You can answer that.
She said that she was listening in on both times he called.
And during the course of her visit to your home that night in December of 2019, did Christine Ricci's demeanor change at all in the course of the conversation?
Yes, there was yelling, there was crying, there was some calmness, there was conversation.
And during the course of that conversation, what, if anything, were you saying about your part in it?
I told her I was truly sorry for my part, that I wish that I had waited for them to truly be legally divorced before anything moved on in our relationship. And, you know, I can't take it back, but I do apologize and I wish them happiness.
And how long was your conversation with Christine Ricci on that date, if you recall?
I'd say at least an hour.
And how did the conversation end?
She said she forgives me and she asked if she could give me a hug.
Did you hug?
Yes.
And drawing your attention, ma'am, to January 30th, 2020, did you receive a call from the defendant?
I had a voicemail, yes.
And what did you listen to the voicemail?
Yes.
And what did she say?
She asked if her and Michael could come over and see me and talk because she thought he needed that for his therapy.
And that was a message she had left?
Yes.
And where were you when you received the voice message?
At work.
Did you respond?
A little while later, I texted her.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is the January.
Yeah.
I think we're okay on this one.
May I approach?
Yes.
Thank you. Ma'am, I'm just going to ask you to take a look at another few pages of documents. I believe it's 4 pages, starting with January 30th, 2020 at 1:40 PM. If you could just start and read that to yourself into the next few pages and let me know if you recognize that series of messages, please.
Okay. Yes.
You recognize that, ma'am?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
I had texted her after the voicemail and then she responded.
And is this a fair and accurate depiction of your text conversation with Christine Ricci on January 30th, 2020 at 1:40 PM?
Yes.
I'd ask that this be marked as the next exhibit, please.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor.
Renewed?
Yes.
I understand the objection. It's overruled. It'll be admitted as Exhibit 33. Thank you.
May I publish this and question the witness?
You may.
Thank you. Ma'am, just showing you what was just marked as Exhibit 33. Fair to say that you initiated the text conversation on January 30th, 2020 at 1:40, correct?
Yes.
And you initiated that text conversation after the phone call you just described, the message you received from Christine Ricci?
Yes.
And in this text message, you indicate hello to her and that you just got her message, you're at work, so you can't talk. And then you indicated if you guys want to call after 4 for a quick conversation, that's fine. And then you further indicated you don't want to see them in person. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And did you receive a text message back from her?
Yes.
And that's a message from Christine Ricci, correct?
Yes.
And just so we're clear, at the top of the page, it indicates Christine, and that's how that's how you knew it was from her, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in this response, she indicates she understands your hesitancy to see Michael Ricci and how difficult it must be, but that they are working on therapy and talking to you is something that the therapist thought would be, a good idea for his therapy. Is that correct?
Yes.
And she further indicates in the series of messages that she also had a few things she's confused about, and she wants to be able to get some answers from you, correct?
Yes.
And that, just moving on to the next page. The end of that text chain indicates basically if she could get some thoughts straightened out, she could better help her daughter understand what's going on. And she's not asking to go inside your home, she's just asking for a sit down outside, correct?
Yes.
And then you texted her back indicating you know this is a process and you were wishing that they both could heal and move on, correct?
Yes,
And again, as you indicated earlier, you wish to her that the two of them would be happy and that your therapist advised that you have to set boundaries as it relates to this situation, correct?
yes,
And then you end it by saying, I can't express enough how unbelievably sorry you are, correct?
yes,
And then it continues on and Christine continues to text back, correct?
yes,
And then she asks if you would mind if she called you because she needs to get questions answered to piece things together to understand what was happening in Michael Ritchie's mind, correct?
yes,
And then you indicated you have a few minutes now. And at that point, she indicates, okay, give me a minute to go outside, correct?
yes.
And ultimately, did you speak to her on the phone that day?
Yes.
And did you speak to her? Do you know if Michael was on the phone as well?
I didn't hear him.
Okay. And what was the nature of that conversation?
She had another couple dates that she needed to know about.
Anything stand out in your mind as to a specific time or date she was inquiring about?
I don't remember the date now, but I remember when she asked the date, she asked about there was a benefit for Officer Chestnut at the BBC, and I was out of the state. I was on a work conference in Memphis, so I said I was not there, so I can't help you.
And then the conversation ended, is that fair to say?
Yes.
And now drawing your attention to March 18th, 2020, did something happen on this day?
Yes.
Where were you?
I had just gotten home from work.
And what are your hours like, or what were your hours like on this particular time frame we're referring to?
I know I got home a little later. My typical hours are 8 to 4, but if there's a child, actively passing away, I don't leave right away.
Okay. And who was at home with you when you got to your home?
My daughter,
And how old was your daughter at the time?
21.
And could you describe what happened?
It was the beginning of COVID, so as soon as I came in, I took my scrubs off and I was about to get in the shower.
And what happened?
My daughter came into my room and said that Christine was there.
And do you recall if it was dark or light out?
It was at least dusk. I can't remember if it was dark. I don't think it was that dark.
Was this a planned visit?
I didn't know about it, no.
Okay. And what, if anything, happened next?
I told my daughter to tell her to leave, that I had nothing else to say. And then my daughter came back in and said she's not leaving until she talks to you. So she said, I told her that if she doesn't leave, I'm going to call the police.
Okay.
And I said, go ahead. And then I received a text from Christine.
Okay, hold on, I'll get to that.
Okay.
So as this was going on, were you able to see Christine, or was she strictly talking to your daughter?
Just my daughter.
And where was Christine in relationship to your daughter, if you know?
Outside, as far as I know.
Okay. And you indicated that as this was going on, you also received a text message, is that right?
Yes.
May I approach?
You may.
Ma'am, I'm just going to show you another series, 3 pages, starting with where it says March 18th, 2020 at 6:51 PM. I'd ask you to just take a look at that in the next couple of pages and look up when you're done reading it yourself and let me know if you recognize it. Do you recognize it, ma'am?
Yes.
And what do you recognize it to be?
Her text while I was getting ready to get in the shower.
And this is a fair and accurate depiction of the series of text messages on March 18th, 2020, initiated by Christine Ricci.
Yes.
I'd ask that this be marked as an exhibit.
Subject to the earlier objections, any other objections, Attorney Wood?
No, Your Honor.
All right. I overruled the objection. It'll be admitted as Exhibit 34.
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I publish and question the witness?
You may.
Thank you. Ma'am, showing you what's now marked as Exhibit 34, starting with the first message dated March 18, 2020 at 6:51 p.m. Is this a text message from the defendant?
Yes.
And she's texting you while she's at your house?
Yes.
And she indicates she'd like to speak to you. And then if she, and it says alls the cops, assuming that means calls the cops, I will have all of it plastered everywhere for all to know.
Yes.
And it continues on to the next page where she indicates, call the cops and we could have it out in open court for public record, your choice, correct?
Yes.
And then you respond by saying she got scared, she called already, you could have just called me. Who are you referring to?
My daughter.
And then, again, this is while Christine Ricci is still at your house that this series of text messages is occurring.
Yes.
And then the defendant, Christine Ricci, indicates she asked to speak to you nicely. And she said, meaning your daughter, you were in the shower, and she indicates she told your daughter she'd wait, at which point your daughter told her to leave. And then the defendant said, you could just open the door and talk to me. I know you're right there. I need to speak to you face to face. If you want to involve the police, that's on you, but just know it's only going to hurt you, correct?
Yes.
And again, just so it's clear, the date of this is March 18th, 2020, correct?
Yes.
And you indicate there's nothing else you can say. You've apologized as much as you can, correct?
Yes.
And then lastly, she indicates, but there's a voicemail I have that I would like explained, correct?
Yes.
At some point, ma'am, did you go outside?
No.
Did you make observations of what was going on outside?
I could hear.
And did you hear the defendant when you were inside?
Yes.
And what were you hearing the defendant saying?
Her yelling. I just need to, well, at this point, the police had showed up.
Okay.
And so she was yelling to them, I need to talk to her. I just have a question. And then she started screaming, she takes care of dying children. Do you know who she is? I'm going to put this all over social media. And they kept asking her to leave. And she kept saying, I'm not leaving until I talk to her.
Okay. And her tone of voice?
Screaming.
At some point, did the defendant leave your home that night?
Yes.
And how long was the defendant being asked to leave, either by your daughter or the police, before she actually left?
Oh, I don't, if I had to guess, I'd say like 15 minutes they kept asking her.
When the police
The
arrived?
police officers, yeah.
But prior to that, she had been at your home for a while asking to talk to you?
Yes.
And ma'am, how long in total were you friends with Michael Ricci?
I mean, I had met him once or twice before 2018, so I wouldn't consider that friendship, but I'd say 8 months.
Okay. And during the times you spent with him, what, if any observations did you make of erratic behavior on his part?
Objection, Your Honor.
See at the side of the bench? So jurors, I gave you the instruction, well, I'll see counsel at the side of the bench.
Ma'am, during the 8 months of your friendship with Michael Ricci, can you describe observations you made of him generally?
He was very kind, very sweet, very calm nature.
Did you ever make any observations of him in terms of his sobriety or his level of intoxication when you would be with him?
What do you mean?
Did you ever see him drunk?
No.
May I have one moment, please?
May?
Thank you. Nothing further, thank you.
Your Honor, briefly at sidebar, if I could.
Yes.